Hello, this is Doug Reeside. I'm the curator of the Billy Rose Theater Division at New York Public Library, and also the curator of this exhibit in the company of Hal Prince, Broadway Producer, Director, Collaborator. The exhibition was meant to run until March 31st, and we're currently thinking about what we can do next, but since the library is closed due to the coronavirus, and before we shut down the building altogether, I wanted to take you on a quick tour of this exhibition in case you haven't had a chance to see it yet. So we're standing right inside the Lincoln Center Plaza area. This is the front door of the library. The exhibit is in the Owen Slager Gallery, which is our largest gallery at the Library for the Performing Arts. If you come to the plaza during the evening, you can actually see these chaser lights from the plaza, which I hope has drawn some people into the exhibition. But let's take a look and go on in. So the first thing you're greeted with when you enter the gallery is this wall of names of people that worked with Hal Prince. These are all of Hal Prince's collaborators from Broadway. So he, of course, worked with a lot of different people off Broadway and in opera and in other venues, but these are the people that he worked with on Broadway. And the titles of his shows from the musical The Prince of Broadway that Bailiff Bort designed appear on the screen here in a projection with Jason Robert Brown's overture for the show playing. You can see here there's a door that says the offices of George Abbott, Robert E. Griffith, and Harold S. Prince. This is not exactly the kind of door he would have had at Rockefeller Center. He wouldn't have had that glass or frosted glass, but we wanted to have the names on the door, and so it's sort of approximation. Here is an introduction to the exhibit in which we explain how the show is about collaboration and Hal's genius at collaboration, and there's a video from our archives in which he describes his process and also tells people to go to the Library for the Performing Arts. So as we go down to this corner, we're introduced to Chamberlain and Lyman Brown, who are the first producers that Hal worked with. There's a letter here from Mrs. A.B. Kahn, which introduces Hal to Chamberlain Brown. I don't know, but in his autobiography, Hal mentions that an actress friend of his grandmother introduced him to Chamberlain Brown, and I wonder if Mrs. A.B. Kahn is that actress friend. We have letters here from Hal to Chamberlain Brown, and from Chamberlain back to Hal, talking about his first job. He was scheduled to work at the Algonquin Playhouse, but it seems like he got a different job. He was to work as a stage manager on the show Just David, which I think is a children's show, and he was to make $125 over that summer. So here we have attempted to recreate Hal's office from 1959 or so. It was a small office, probably not much bigger than this space here, actually maybe even a little bit smaller. I spoke with Annette Myers, who was his assistant during this period, and she sketched out the way the office looked. This is not exactly as it looked, but it's an approximation. On the desk here, we encourage people to sit down and take a look at this paperwork that we've reproduced from his archive. There's inventories, things for Damn Yankees and the Pajama Game. There's a phone that rings occasionally, and if you pick it up, you'll hear Hal talking about West Side Story and how he and Stephen Sondheim started working on West Side Story when he was on the road with New Girl in Town, and Sondheim had just lost his producer. And there's more paperwork here. There's a calendar page. These are all from his archive, but they're reproductions, so we allow people to touch them and play with them. This is a fun letter. This is a letter to the investors in New Girl in Town, and Hal is encouraging them to join his new production of West Side Story. And then there's a list of all of the people that they were thinking of for the adaptation of 7.5 Cents, which of course became the Pajama Game. This is a photograph from Colin Cuprine, from Eileen Darby, I think, at the Graphic House. This is Lemuel Ayres' design for Pajama Game, and early design, and another design for the same show. I'm going to take the phone off the hook so it doesn't keep ringing during this tour. But here you can see a Al Hirschfeld caricature of the show Say Darling, in which Hal himself was caricatured. You can see the representation of the actor Robert Morris, who is playing Hal in a kind of caricature there. And these photographs, which are actually taken from our collections in the main library, the Schwarzman Building Library, are reproduced here. They're colorized with a computer program and showed the view that would have been something like Hal's view from Rockefeller Center at that period. Here at the end of the office, we introduced Ruth Mitchell, who was Hal's longtime collaborator. She worked with him as a stage manager, a production stage manager, an assistant to the director, and eventually the executive producer of some of the shows in the 1980s. And you'll see her work is scattered throughout the rest of the exhibition. You'll encounter her time and time again. Here's a schedule that Hal put together of his day. Mary Bryant, his publicist, had asked for it for a publication that they were going to show what Hal does all day, and you can see maybe here how remarkable it is. He's working on West Side Story and Baker Street and Fiddler on the Roof, all in the same day. He was named one of the millionaires under 40 by Time magazine in December of 1965. And this section of the exhibit looks at Hal as a creative producer and also looks at his work as a director as he begins to direct shows like She Loves Me and Baker Street and Superman. We'll come back to that in a minute, but here are the telegrams, the congratulatory telegrams that Hal received for directing A Family Affair on Broadway, his first Broadway directing job. One of my favorites is the one from Jerry Robbins, where Jerry Robbins, who of course directed West Side Story with him, says, okay, just don't start choreographing. Love and luck, Jerry R. Here we see She Loves Me, which Hal also directed. There's a radio schedule that he was on the front cover of, a fun picture of Barbara Cook eating ice cream, a list of possible cast options, and some of the correspondence about the ice cream promotions that they used, because of course the song Vanilla Ice Cream in the show is a standout song. Hal also worked at the Phoenix Theater with T. Edward Hamilton, who they created essentially tours that went around and would occasionally sit down on Broadway for a month or two. He directed The Visit and The Great God Brown, and here are some of the Boris Aronson scenic designs for that show. Boris Aronson was the collaborator that Hal says in his autobiography was the most important collaboration that he was ever introduced to, which is saying something considering how many people Hal worked with. These are Hal's notes on The Great God Brown, one of the shows that Hal worked on with the Phoenix Theater. And then we get into another Boris Aronson design and Patricia Zipperot's designs for Fiddler on the Roof. There's Patricia Zipperot talking there. Here's a letter to Jerry Bach talking about Fiddler, another Boris Aronson design, an introduction to the songwriters that Hal worked with, Stephen Sondheim, Bach and Harnack, and Kander and Ebb, and Boris Aronson. There's a program that we reproduced from the Jewish division here at the library. Boris Aronson worked in the Yiddish theater, and this play was one of the plays that he worked on. Of course, here's some more Fiddler on the Roof material. The set is rotating as it would have in the original production with the famous turntable. And there is a model, Boris Anderson model that has the fiddler actually on the roof that we borrowed from the family of Boris Aronson. Here are some of his miniature designs, flat designs. More models. And of course, more of the just really beautiful designs that Aronson created. You can hear playing in here Jerry Bach playing demos for Sheldon Harnick for shows like She Loves Me and Fiddler on the Roof. Here are Patricia Ziprat's designs for She Loves Me. Photograph of the cast. The weekly box office receipts. And a letter from Hal Prince to Mikos Laslos, who of course wrote the story that the musical is based upon. This is about Hal's work on Baker Street, a Sherlock Holmes musical that he directed for Alexander Cohen, who produced it. Some material related to the show. And this is kind of fun. The show had 3 different directors, and so we have reproduced the contracts for all 3 of them, and they all have different terms. Hal's contract is notable because he wants the future productions to note that the production was originally staged by him, by Hal Prince. Original production staged by Hal Prince, directed by Hal Prince. Hal was also the president of what is now the Broadway League, and during that time he introduced some interesting initiatives. He started something called the Theater Bus, which would bring people to the theater district who felt uncomfortable getting there by other means. He also worked to make it possible to buy tickets at places other than the box office. There was a regulation that prohibited anyone from selling tickets if they sold anything else at that location. And so Hal worked to try to broaden the places that tickets could be sold, Broadway tickets could be sold. He also experimented with computerized ticket sales. And at Macy's, they were selling tickets, and here it shows that the Macy's ticket sales really helped increase the ticket sales for their shows. So this section has a couple of computer interactives. This is a list of, or a selection of letters that Hal wrote to his collaborators while working on the musical Flora the Red Menace. And it's sort of fun. You can, because they were working in so many different places, they had to write letters to each other throughout the production process. And so with these letters, you can kind of begin to really reconstruct the way that the show came together. Here is Hal writing to George Abbott about the birth of his son, Charlie. Charlie arrived promptly and efficiently. The whole process from nudging me in the ribs at 12:30 in the morning, I think this is it, till he appeared at 5:15, was cheerful, painless, no anesthetic was used, and kind of elevating. We also have some of Ruth Mitchell's prompt books for some of the shows that she worked on. And we have thousands of photographic negatives of these shows. So when you turn the page on the prompt book, here where you can see all of the cues, the screen will change to show what is happening on that page. And in some cases, we have so many photographs that we were able to create animations by stitching the photographs together. Here's a section on Baker Street. There's actually one of the Bill Baird marionettes is lent to us by Jerome Coopersmith. And a letter about selecting the theater. This is actually, I think it's kind of interesting. This is the schedule for, this is the TV schedule for the advertisement that was created for the show. A lot of times people say that Pippin was the first Broadway musical to have a television advertisement, but in fact Baker Street did, and we have it occasionally on this screen. It'll show up in a bit. And then for Superman, we have the fitness Hudson Health card for Bob Holliday, who played Superman. So he's trying to get into the role. Photographs of the lobby, rehearsals, promotional photograph of Bob Holliday in the telephone booth. Hal was experimenting with Superman, in Superman, with ticket pricing, where the cheapest tickets were cheaper than they usually were, and the best tickets were slightly more expensive, with the idea that more people could afford to see the show if the cheaper tickets were more subsidized. There's the commercial for Baker Street that's playing there. It's a Superboy comic strip that advertised It's a Bird, It's a Plane, It's Superman. A invoice for a aerial banner that was pulled behind an airplane, and a poster saying Superman is fun. One of my favorite artifacts in the exhibit is this wheel, this roulette wheel that Ruth Mitchell gave to Hal. It has the names of all the shows on it, and it is meant to be a metaphor for the fact that theater is always a gamble. No matter how successful you think a show might be, you never really know until the audience comes or doesn't come. What's interesting is this wheel is actually depicted in several photographs from the 1970s, but it appears that Hal actually added titles to the wheel over time. So there's Parade from 1998, and Phantom, of course, from 86 or so. And whenever as the shows were produced, he seems to have had them added to the different sections. Of course, 86 is the London production of Phantom. Here is a video from the play 10 Days That Shook the World in Moscow, produced by the Taganka Theater. Hal saw this in 1966, and he says that it really changed the way that he thought about directing, moving from a kind of more realistic representational style of directing to this more abstract and theatrical directing style. Here, these revolutionaries are pulling out a bench, and as the people sitting on the bench in the end, as the bench is pulled, they fall off the end of the bench, which is, of course, very similar to what Hal did in Evita, where the generals play musical chairs and are slowly eliminated as the chairs are removed. This section introduces Cabaret. This is the magazine that Hal, from Life magazine, the article that Hal famously brought into to rehearsals on the first day of rehearsal and showed it to the cast and asked them where they thought this photograph happened. And being in a show about Nazis, they all thought it was in Nazi Germany, according to Hal, and he revealed that in fact it was happening today in Little Rock, or in Chicago rather, to show that the racism and the way in which a scared community can be turned against an outside group is still a very pressing concern in the 60s, as indeed it is today. Hal was stationed in Stuttgart, Germany, right after World War II, when he was drafted into the army. And while he was there, he would have been only a few miles away from several former concentration camps. And I have to believe that this had an effect on him, and certainly the story or the human condition of a scared community turning against an outside group is a theme that Hal rehearses again and again in Cabaret, in indeed Phantom of the Opera, Parade, Willie Stark, many of these other shows, Zorba. Many of them deal with that theme. Here's a set model, Boris Aronson set model for Cabaret. You can see the mirror that reflects the audience back on itself and also shows us the back of this little Joel Grey miniature. If it's probably too light in here at the moment, but you can see we have Joel Grey from the 1987 production welcoming people in to the show, singing Velkommen. These are some set models that were recently restored for this exhibition from Cabaret. Boris Aronson designed both I Am a Camera and Cabaret, and we have both designs. Of course, Cabaret is based on the play I Am a Camera, and we have Boris Aronson's designs for both shows, as well as some just early ideas for the show that I think are kind of fun. Patricia Ziprot talks about in some of the videoed interviews that we have that she and Boris Aronson would just kind of work together and sketch ideas to try to get a sense of what the show looked like, and some of these early ideas are really fun. This is a Bauhaus man. This is Patricia Ziprot design of costumes for Tomorrow Belongs to Me. So this room is dedicated to the work of Boris Aronson, again, the designer that Hal said was one of the most important people he was ever introduced to. This is one of my favorite objects in the entire collection. This is the Follies set model. And a design for the show. We also have the process work that Boris Aronson created to go from this reproduction of a famous piece of art that this particular photocopy actually comes from our picture collection here at the library. He used that to inspire his work, and then eventually he incorporated that art into the set of A Little Night Music. We have Florence Klotz's costumes for the show as well, a cast photograph. We have Florence Klotz's designs, costume designs, and more of Boris Aronson's designs from Follies. Again, he moves from an image of a fan taken from the New York Public Library picture collection to the fan that we see in the Loveland scene. Here's the famous picture of Gloria Swanson that gave Hal the kind of image that he needed to understand how to do the show. And photographs of the set being constructed. Pacific Overtures designs by Boris Aronson. And the beautiful Boris Aronson set model. Zorba designs. These two were restored for the exhibition. This is the company set model, and this was a discovery that we made over the course of putting together the exhibition. Of course, the original production used these slides that Boris Aronson commissioned to have created, and they were projected on the back wall. And when we were trying to put the exhibition together, we were trying to figure out where we would show them, and we decided to try shining them on the set model. And it seems as if the set model was actually designed for that purpose. You can see they really show up well on the back of the model. These are costume designs for company. This is a nice letter, the letter where Hal proposes to divide the management fee with Ruth Mitchell for company. George Firth's notes on the show. Another nice letter, a letter of congratulations from Richard Rogers to Sondheim and Hal, and Sondheim's response. And a letter from Hal to George Firth, and then George Firth writes back, writing about the play Twigs that he was working on at the time that was drawn from the same source material as Company, the same set of plays that George Firth had written before there became an idea to turn it into a musical. Here's an early set design by Boris Aronson for Company. And then a black and white photograph of the show showing the slides. We have many, many interviews with Hal on video throughout the exhibition, as well as video recordings from our Theater on Film and Tape archive of the productions themselves. It's a photograph of the cast of Sweeney Todd, some of Fran Lee's designs for the costumes for the show. Here's Hugh Wheeler writing to Hal, and the Christopher Bond script that the musical is based on with annotations by Eugene and Franny Lee. Eugene and Franny Lee also worked on Candide with Hal. There's some of their designs. This is the actual set piece from The Prince of Broadway that was lent to us by Kamiko Yoshi, who is one of the producers on The Prince of Broadway. The show, Beowulf Boritt, who designed The Prince of Broadway, encoded the names of the designers in his set. So there's Eugene Lee T, a tribute to the original designer, Eugene Lee. This room is dedicated to the shows of the 80s and the late 70s. There's Evita. Patti LuPone's dress. This is actually from the Australian production, but it's more or less the same dress that she wore on Broadway. It's a slightly different pattern, but it's basically the same dress. Hal talks about annotating the liner notes for the cast recording, and there are his annotations, along with some ideas that he passed on to Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice. These are some letters from between Andrew Lloyd Webber and Hal. This is a fun letter. This is the letter where he turns down Cats. He suggests that that they look to the director of Ten Types, who might be better suited for the material of Cats. So the back wall here is, the wallpaper on the back wall is the Merrily Press, which was created by a cast member in Merrily so that the young cast could all stay together, could stay in contact in those days before Facebook. And it's just a kind of fun newsletter, but one of my favorite things, there's a quiz that Lonnie Price suggests of which actors sang which song for their audition. And then the answers are down here. On the 20th century. Some more of the costume designs. Not ultimately used, of course. In Merrily, they famously used the t-shirts instead. There's some notes by George Firth on Merrily, and again his meeting notes, which he was a very complete note taker. He documented the meetings very thoroughly. Some of Hal's notes. And these are some of the less commercially successful pieces from the 80s. There's a video of Grind that will eventually show on that screen, and then here's the set for A Doll's Life, the sequel to Doll's House, and letters about Grind. Section on some of the plays and operas of this period. This is a letter from Joanna Glass about the play Memory that Hal worked on. There's Grandchild of Kings playing on the screen there. These are the Showboat costumes by Florence Klotz. We borrowed these from the Goodspeed Opera House, which now owns them. Then the section on Phantom of the Opera, some of the set pieces, and of course these are the mannequins that actually appear on stage during Act 2 to fill out the staircase during Masquerade. The rehearsal calendar for Phantom, the sort of scene breakdown for the actors. On the screens back there at the back, you can see Hal winning one of his 21 Tonys. We have a wall of video monitors showing Hal winning all of his Tonys, and interspersed between them there are tributes to Hal that were written right before he died, actually, for the exhibit. But they're very sweet. They represent many of the collaborators that he worked with. And here's Kiss of the Spider Woman, the Beowulf Borit's recreation of the set for The Prince of Broadway. Brian Stokes Mitchell pointed out that the beds are reversed in the Prince of Broadway, that Molina would have been the bed on the left in the original production. Small section on Parade with a letter that we borrowed from Jason Robert Brown from Hal to Jason and Alfred Urey, the book writer. It's Bounce playing on the screen there, and then here's the Beowulf Borit's set models for Love Music, and then more of his set models for The Prince of Broadway. And a couple of songs that Stephen Sondheim sent to us as part of the tributes that, in most cases, we put the tributes on those screens, but these we reproduced. These are songs that Sondheim wrote for Hal's birthdays. And then this is the sort of cabaret section where we encourage people to sing a song from one of Hal Prince's shows or tell a story and post it on social media and, with the hashtag Hal Prince NYPL. And several people have done, so you can look for that on Instagram or YouTube or Twitter. So that's the back wall. Look back at the exhibit. All of the posters, or not all of the posters, but many of the posters from his shows up on the wall there. Get a little closer so you can see those. So that's the exhibit. Thank you for joining me. I hope you can come and see it before we close.